Leavenworth, and so mom's.
All right, well, we are moving on to chapter 2. Everybody has handouts. So we're gonna start by reading chapter 2. We'll kind of break it up like we did last time. There's a couple of things kind of more like background oriented that we're gonna go through, kind of similar to last week, and then there's gonna be more just kind of like open discussion once we kind of get some of that background information laid out. So with chapter 2, just trying to find some good ways to break it up. If someone would take the beginning until verse 7, and then 8 through 13, and then 14 through the end. Do we have 3 volunteers?
I'll do 8 through 13, and I don't have all the words.
Okay, Andrea's got the second one. Who wants number 1 and number 3?
I guess I can do one.
Okay.
It's 1 through what?
7.
Okay. Now there was a wealthy and influential man in Bethlehem named Boaz, who was a relative of Naomi's husband, Elimelech.
Elimelech, yeah.
Say it again.
Elimelech.
Elimelech. One day Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go out into the harvest fields to pick up the stalks of grain left behind by anyone who is kind enough to let me do it." Naomi replied, "All right, my daughter, go ahead." So Ruth went out to gather grain behind the harvest field. And as it happened, she found herself working in a field that belonged to Boaz, the relative of her father-in-law. And while she was there, Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. "The Lord be with you," he said. "The Lord bless you," the harvesters replied. Then Boaz asked his foreman, "Who is that young woman over there? Who does she belong to?" And the foreman replied, "She is the young woman from Moab who came back with Naomi. She asked me this morning if she could gather grain behind the harvesters. She has been hard at work ever since, except for a few minutes rest in the shelter."
Then Boaz said to Ruth, "Listen carefully, my daughter. Do not go to glean in another field. Furthermore, do not go on from this one, but stay here with my maids. Let your eyes be on the field which they reap, and go after them. Indeed, I have committed the servants not to touch you. When you are thirsty, go to the water jars and drink from what the servants draw." Then she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, "Why have I found favor in your sight that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner?" Boaz replied to her, "All that you have done for your mother-in-law after the death of your husband has been fully reported to me, and how you left your father and your mother in the land of your birth and came to a people that you did not previously know. May the Lord reward your work and your wages be full from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to seek refuge." Then she said, "I have found favor in your sight, my lord, for you have comforted me and indeed have spoken kindly to your maidservant, though I am not like one of your maidservants."
At mealtime, I'll read it.
Okay.
At mealtime, Boaz said to her, "Come here and eat some of this bread and dip your morsel in the sour wine." So she sat beside the reapers, and he heaped up for her some parched grain. She ate until she was satisfied, and she had some left over. When she got up to glean, Boaz instructed his young men, "Let her glean even among the standing sheaves, and do not reproach her. You must also pull out some handfuls for her from the bundles, and leave them for her to glean, and do not rebuke her." So she gleaned in the field until evening. Then she beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. she picked it up and came into town. And her mother-in-law saw how much she gleaned. And then she took out and gave her what was left over after she herself had been satisfied. Her mother-in-law said to her, "Where did you glean today? And where have you worked? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked and said, the name of the man with whom I worked today was Boaz. Then Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, blessed be he by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. Naomi also said to her, the man is a relative of ours. He is our kinsman. He is our nearest kin. Then Ruth, the Moabite, said, he even said to me, stay close by my servants until I have finished all my harvest. Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, it is better, my daughter, that you go out with his young women. Otherwise, you might be bothered by in another field. So she stayed close to the young women of Boaz, gleaning until the end of the barley and wheat harvest. And she lived with her mother-in-law.
So one of the things, the first question before we kind of go over some more information about the background from the chapter, who instigates the initiative to address their financial situation?
Well, Ruth says, let me go to the field and glean.
Right. So it's just an interesting thing to look at because in chapter 3, when we get there, we'll see someone else take the lead in that chapter. So just interesting that in this chapter, Ruth is the one who makes the decision to figure out a way to help her mother-in-law and her survive.
All right. So then another question, so Ruth ends up gleaning in Boaz's field. And, you know, it doesn't say that Naomi said, oh, go to Boaz's field. He's one of our kinsmen. And yet she knows who Boaz is when Ruth comes home and tells her this. So do you think it's by chance or by providence that she ended up in that field?
Well, how did they pick their, I mean, how many fields are there and how, I'm just wondering, you know, is it like when you have in San Diego, they have the workers that you go pick up and, you know, they work for the day or something?
Right, yeah, I mean, it doesn't really say, it just says she goes to this field to glean, and we're gonna talk about gleaning here in a minute. But she just apparently randomly ends up in Boaz's field. So I guess just think about that as we go through this. Do you think it was, you know, some divine guidance, or was it just pure chance?
Naomi seems to think it was divine,
Mhm,
like at the end of the chapter.
mhm.
I mean, I do kind of wonder how big the community was at that point, again, how many fields there
Yeah,
was.
Mhm.
Thing, but Naomi seems to interpret it as, you know, this is God putting you where you need to be.
Mhm.
However, in verse 3, if there's the second sentence says, as it happened,
Mhm. Mhm.
she came to the part of the field.
Mhm.
Well,
Mhm.
maybe her footsteps were guided there.
I know, so that's the thing, it's like, we may never know, it's like, you know, but anyway, it's just something interesting to think about.
And that as it happened may have been a way to show that Ruth didn't plan it. So Ruth didn't know, she wasn't going to intentionally take advantage of this relationship. She just was very innocent in the fact that she landed where she did. So there may be some purpose in kind of phrasing it that way.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't seem like she knew who Boaz was.
Right.
And it also said, in mine, it says she happened to come to the portion of the field belonging to Boaz. So is it?
Maybe it was one big field that he owned part of or something, yeah. Who knows, yeah. All interesting. Okay, so we are going to read 3 passages that talk about this whole gleaning thing. Would someone like to look up Leviticus 19? And somebody else can be looking up Leviticus 23:22. And someone else can look up Deuteronomy 24:19 through 22. Anybody have Leviticus 19?
I got 23.
You've got 23, okay.
Tell us again.
So 19, 9 through 10.
Yeah, I got that.
Oh, you do, okay.
Excuse me.
What was Deuteronomy 9?
24:19 through 22.
So Leviticus 19, excuse me, 9 and 10. When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap to the very harvest. You shall not strip your vineyard bare or gather the fallen grapes of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the alien. I am the Lord your God.
Okay, and Paul,
Did you just read 23?
No, that's 19.
Because 23:22 says, when you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap the very edge of your field. Or gather the gleanings of your harvest, leave them for the poor and for the foreigner residing among you, I'm the Lord your God.
yes, we're gonna hear the same thing over and over, yes. You've got Deuteronomy. Okay, yeah. No, well,
When you reap your harvest in your field and have forgotten a sheep in the field, you shall not go back to get it. It shall be for the alien, for the orphans, and for the widow, in order that the Lord your God may bless you in all of the work of your hands. When you beat your olive tree, you shall not go over the boughs again. It shall be for the alien, for the orphan, and for the widow. When you gather the grapes of your vineyard, you shall not go over it again. It shall be for the alien, for the orphan, and for the widow. You shall remember that you are a slave in this land of Egypt. Therefore, I am commanding you to do this thing.
thanks. So again and again, it's kind of hammered home to these Israelites that they are supposed to leave kind of the edges of their field, anything that's dropped for foreigners, orphans, and widows. So Ruth is a triply disadvantaged person. She's poor, she's a widow, and she's a foreigner. So she has every right to just show up in a field and just start gleaning. And nobody would say anything to her because she has that right. But she actually goes and asks permission. So it may indicate that she's unsure about this right, like she's not an Israelite. Does she really know? Or it may simply reflect that she's particularly polite. So I don't know, I guess, that's just two things to kind of think about. She may not be sure that she has that right. I don't know, but
She's a foreigner.
although she does, but she may be a little nervous. I mean, I would be kind of nervous if I were like a newcomer and, just like, okay, well, my mother-in-law said I can do this, but and I know it's supposed to be a thing. Somebody told me at the well that I could do this, but I'm kind of freaked out about it. So.
She doesn't know the customs.
Exactly.
But it's also, I think it's really foreign for us to get our head around this concept because, we don't have that tradition in
No.
America. You don't just show up in someone's field and start picking after the harvest. I mean, someone's gonna say something, it's probably gonna be the sheriff.
Yeah.
But then conversely, it's a big deal in Cloud County, to have people glean and donate to the food bank and stuff. But that's.
But we do that on permission basis, I mean, there's, our tradition's a little different, so, but in this case, so it would be something that a person could assume a right to do. So I think in some respects, it does speak to her personality, her demeanor,
Mhm.
her unassummingness.
Yeah.
Well, do we have a sense of how old she is? I get the picture she's quite young.
Well, I would think so, because I mean, girls got married at like 15. And I mean, even if she was married for 10 years, she might be 25 years old. I mean, she's not that old and she's going into, a foreign community and, she's been told this is a thing, but kind of nerve-wracking.
So the other thing that again comes up, and it will come up in every chapter from here on out, is the levirate marriage law that we talked about last week. Because it's confusing, we have put together a little demonstration to help us understand it a little bit better. So first, I'm going to have us read the section in Deuteronomy and Leviticus that refer to it, and then I'll ask for some volunteers to help us kind of walk through this so that hopefully we have a little better understanding of what's going on. So I need someone to look up Deuteronomy 25, verses 5 through 10.
Got it.
And then Leviticus 25, verse 25.
Yeah, I got that.
Okay. Nancy.
When brothers reside together and one of them dies and has no son, the wife of the deceased shall not be married outside the family to a stranger. Her husband's brother shall go into her, taking her in marriage and performing the duty of a husband's brother to her. And the firstborn whom she bears shall succeed to the name of the deceased's brother, so that his name may not be blotted out of Israel. But if the man has no desire to marry his brother's widow, then his brother's widow shall go up to the elders at the gate and say, my husband's brother refuses to perpetuate his brother's name in Israel. He will not perform the duty of a husband's brother to me. Then the elders of his town shall summon him and speak to him. If he persists saying, I have no desire to marry her, then his brother's wife shall go up to him in the presence of the elders, pull her sandal or his sandal off his foot, spit in his face and declare, this is what is done to the man who does not build up his brother's house. Throughout Israel, his family shall be known as the house of him whose sandal was pulled off.
Change. So they can go to bigamy, they can have more than one wife. I assume his brother will have a wife.
Mhm,
Okay.
mhm.
So here's Leviticus. If any one of your kin falls into difficulty and sells a piece of property, then the next of kin shall come and redeem what the relative has sold.
So there's just precedent here for taking care of the name and inheritance of part of the kingdom of God, right? The people that are part of Israel. So we're gonna do a little demonstration to hopefully make this make more sense. So I need,
Mention that Ruth and Naomi were then considered property.
you can
Yeah,
say it.
okay, so before we start that, so it's kind of weird to think about in our society, but Naomi and Ruth would have been considered part of that property. Just keep that in mind. Yeah,
So there's that too. So I
Yeah.
need 7 people who are willing to stand up and hold a piece of paper. So maybe over here, because
yeah,
there's fewer people to stand in front of.
okay, I can be a person.
Demonstrate that.
Oh, not perfect.
We're pretending we can be a person.
Oh.
Oh, that's good. I'm gonna let you. Hold on, name be brother B. You get to be wife B. Andrea is the son of brother A and B.
You're my kid.
You get to be son number 1, and Stan gets to be the rest of the sons that whoever came. Okay, so to start, we have brother A who married wife A and brother B who married wife B. Okay, so brother A dies. That's you. Okay, and maybe sons of, whoops, I did backwards, didn't I? Sorry. Okay.
Brother B dies.
Sorry, brother B is gonna die, sorry, Bruce. Otherwise, I went backwards. Okay, so right now, brother A and wife A and the sons of brother and wife A are the only ones that exist. And then we have poor wife B out here by themselves. So brother A
Yes,
agrees to take wife B.
do I?
Well, otherwise you're gonna have a single thrown at you.
Take your saddle off. Let's see.
Over here.
Okay.
Bad.
Now, brother A and wife B have a son. Yes,
Son
so
number
son
one.
number one comes over here.
Number one's fun.
And then because there was no birth control at the time, son number 2 plus also come from here
Number
and
2,
here.
3, 4, 5, and 6, 7.
How many ever? Want those?
Yeah,
Got it, you're thinking it's now.
so now the question is, where do the name and the money go? Because that is what the whole purpose of this is,
My
right?
family got really big.
I bet it's me.
Yeah.
I'm so
So-
tired.
I should know.
We have the name of
You're
the brother B and his land, because brother B died,
right.
goes to son number 1. Then we have name and land of brother A. So now Stan has to go back over here.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
And you all then get to share it however many times there.
Because I have all.
I guess.
Yeah,
Get around.
yeah.
I'm still proud of you, son.
So you can see how that allows for brother B to continue to keep his land and name. But when we talk about this, the husband that may not want to go through with this system, you could also see why, because now we have many more sons who have to share brother A's land and holdings.
I did
And
my.
I'm mad because my kids don't get as much.
I don't pay attention to you anymore.
So that's why I'm just.
So this time, didn't just get brother B's everything and then get to divide it equally.
No.
No,
He had to treat it as a separate estate.
Yeah,
yeah,
You
That he
can't
was-
talk your dad.
He was the executor.
yes.
yeah. Yeah.
Does this help it make a little bit more sense? Rather than just reading it on the back?
But the sons of A get their original inheritance.
Yes,
Yes. they
No,
just
not
don't-
torn up, but they get part of the B. but
Part of
all Yeah,
You
right?
get part of, so.
They
They
get
get part of
A
my
plus
stuff.
part of B, but I get all, no. I
No,
get-
you get all of these.
You get all of B.
Yeah,
Yeah, you get all of these.
it's technically the only one who belongs to brother B.
What happens to this progeny of A?
It gets
Well,
divided up
it's-
among the many.
so but see, the first son of, you are the first son, you get all of that. All any other kids with this wife have to share
Because they
in the
are,
original.
they are his.
Yeah,
Because they're his, so can you see why he might not want to do that, because it ruins his first kids, but right to A,
They're going to hate you.
yeah. So say he had, 4 sons that he was gonna, with me, then he ends up with 6 more, and now there's 10 sons. Splitting that same property, and you get everything of that one.
Now, this is assuming that they had children,
Okay,
right?
but if she was a daughter.
now,
Then you got part of the property.
She's part of the property.
She gets torn up and distributed.
Yes,
let's assume for a moment that he doesn't go with the plan and says, no, I'm not doing this. Will he inherit his brother's land then, and will it be his to do with as he wishes? What happens to his brother's land if that is the case?
That's when the next nearest kinsman comes in.
right, it would pass to the next.
But not the wife.
No,
No.
So it would go to the brother then.
So it's patriarchal.
it would be whoever's the next.
And it's
next-
separated by lineage.
Try to find.
So if brother can fulfill the lineage is still to the deceased
It
brother.
keeps going to the next.
Yeah, and his offspring only.
Yeah, so then if like he's not gonna do it and it becomes a cousin, then the cousin gets to come in and say, okay, fine, I'll take her as wife. Now he gets the wife, he gets the property, and he gets.
But it's dependent on the wife. I mean, it's dependent on him taking the wife. He can't just say, well, I'll take the land She can stay on as she
Right,
wants.
because he's part of the property. He's part of the property.
Ah,
And we'll see that in chapter 3 or 4, whatever happens. Yes, chapter 4.
The rest of our kids.
Well, or it's totally downtrodden and have no say, and then just dust in the, on the floor. Then,
But wouldn't you have some kind of interest in getting rid of me?
oh, yeah, oh, yeah. Yeah, I would be the one who might see you at the well and turn the other way or something, yes, yeah.
Push her down a little.
Yeah, sure, down, well, true, could be.
Time frame that if she's not produced a male, that he can divorce her?
That I don't know because it's just left, I mean, the rule is left what it is, and I'm sure just like other parts of scripture where we have to have interpretation, I'm sure there were people that were scribes and stuff that's what their job was to basically
Deciding.
be judges in how this stuff goes. And this was actually right after the time of Judges, so that might have been part of their job, was helping kind of organize some of this stuff.
But a man can divorce his wife for really any reason.
Right, yeah. And yeah, so if she did turn out to be barren or only had daughters or whatever, sure, he could just be like, yeah, forget this. And, he might in that case be able to keep the land. Yeah, it would be her fault that she didn't produce a male heir. Yeah.
Somewhere in the Old Testament, and I don't remember where. One of the daughters does inherit the land. But I mean,
It was right as they were taking possession of the land, there was a group of daughters from one particular clan that they had to talk with Moses about, like giving them special rights.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was something about that. I think-
Yeah, I remember something about that too. Yeah.
We've been watching Marie Antoinette on PBS. And I mean, this is centuries later.
Yeah.
And they're still looking for a male heir to adopt, well, the kingdom in this case, but it's pretty incredible that far. And not all that long ago in terms of biblical time, it was still the case. And I don't know if you're using the word property, and my translation applies the word property to wives, and I'm not sure you're really emphasizing that. It's kind of.
It is, I mean, they were property, and so, yeah, the men really did get to make that call.
So I think one of the interesting questions that the study that we're pulling from asks is, who knows what and when? Because that I think is really important. So as far as what we just talked about, this kind of crazy who inherits who scenario, we know that Naomi knows about it because she talked about it last chapter, right? She basically tells the daughters-in-law that she's too old to marry to make a son, so that they won't have protection under that umbrella. So we know Naomi knows about this levirate marriage law, okay? We would assume that if Naomi, who is the wife of a person from Israel who left Israel, so wasn't living in Israel, knows about it, I would guess that Boaz and every other male in this community know about the rule as well, right? That would be safe to say, okay? So the first, or one of the things that Boaz asks when he sees Ruth is he asks his reapers who she is, right? And so at that moment, he knows who Ruth is, that she's connected to Naomi, and he would have known Naomi and Elimelech and how they were related to him, right? So at this point in time, Boaz knows the rule, the law, and he also knows who the characters are. So how does this change how we see this? Because I think, and I am not disputing Boaz's character. We're going to go into a lot of things about him. He's a really great guy. He really is a great guy. But when we learn about these things in a lot of the women's studies I've looked at, it's been very much like, oh, Boaz is the knight in shining armor that comes and sweeps Ruth off of her feet and makes her into a princess. And like, but if they all know what the rule is, and he knows, he's technically, we won't learn this till the next chapter. He's technically not the next of kin, but he's a close kin. why wasn't something done about this right away? Because if they know that they're there and they know what should happen to carry out this thing with the gleaning and all this other stuff, like really, it shouldn't have happened, right? They should have shown up. The people in town should have said, how are we going to take care of this situation? And they should have just handled it. So just want to put that out there because I really, I think it's glossed over a lot of times. And it, like I said, kind of turns it into this more princess, yeah, like a knight in shining armor kind of situation.
So would, like, would Elimelech have had, land that when he died passed on to his sons?
Mhm.
Right,
Right,
yeah,
okay.
and that's what's going on.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's how Ruth is still tied into this because it's connected to her because her husband
Right.
would have inherited it.
okay, okay.
And somehow somebody keeps track of all this when you leave, the land is still yours. I'm not sure how all that works. Because they were not there.
Yeah, they were gone.
So, yeah, so who, yeah, like who would have controlled?
Right. I don't know if they
They
had.
didn't have auditors' offices. It might have been the elders of the community who sort of kept tabs on what family was tied to what plot. of
Some
land.
scribe must have had it
something
written
like
down
that,
or
yeah.
something.
It could have been oral at that point, or it could have
Yeah.
been written down.
No. Elimelech could also have sold that. Uh, You know, we don't know.
He could have, and then the thing that would be at stake was the name, right?
You know,
So if there wasn't any property at the name, which is, I would say, is equally important to the Israelites as the land, even if that was the only thing, that was still an important enough thing to have a
Yeah.
discussion about. Yeah,
You think it had something to do with Ruth being a Moabite? Could there be some racism baked into why they didn't just immediately step up and fix it? If she was tagged to it.
Maybe so.
Yeah, and I read a commentary also on this. And it's interesting is that the commentary identified when was this book written?
mhm,
And there's two different, totally different time frames. One is that issue of Ezra and Nehemiah and
Right.
divorcing,
Right.
which would have made bigotry, racial issue really a huge issue.
mhm.
Mhm.
And yeah, I think maybe it really was.
Not to get too far ahead, but if you look at the person who's technically next to kin, his reaction to Boaz confronting him about it. Initially, he was like, oh yeah, sure, I'd love to have an extra field. Oh, Ruth is attached to it, and he like takes off his own sandal.
So now you're going with
Right.
spoilers.
Sorry. Sorry, but I mean, I'm just saying, I think that there's definitely enough in the narrative. There's some racism going on here.
Yeah.
With the way that it's made and handled, which means. That is part of the reason Ruth needed to go glean, is she was triple disadvantaged and no one was actively trying.
Right, and no one was taking, so they were hungry. I mean, she had to do something about it.
Are they selling this? I can't imagine them just eating this grain and that's it. So
Well,
are they selling it at a market or something?
maybe, although it depends on how long and how much you can glean, because if you pound it and you make flour, I mean, if you're
Yeah.
only able to glean, I mean, say you're like an old widow with no children or whatever, and elderly, you're not, maybe you're frail, you need to take breaks because it's hot, you may not be able to glean that much. It might just be for you. But like Ruth was strong, she was probably young, and plus then she got a whole bunch of cooked grain from him, all this
Yeah.
kind of stuff. You know, maybe then they were able to, or eat the cooked grain that day and then have flour for a couple days. I mean, I don't know,
This is
yeah,
Not a good diet.
Well, I
Just-
but it keeps you alive.
Yeah.
She could have taken the grain and bartered.
That's what. it
Yeah,
was.
Like,
exactly,
you know, I don't want grain, I'm gonna get a pizza. and trade.
yeah.
Or taken it to the co-op kind of.
Yeah.
Mill, and then, here's 10 pounds of grain, and maybe she gets 5 pounds back or something to process, and the
And
rest of it,
pomegranate.
Right.
And she takes, so when you look at the phrasing that they talk about how much she took home, it's the equivalent of 6 gallons worth. So that is
A lot.
a lot.
Yeah, that's
And,
a lot.
and if you think about it, I don't know how much a gallon of grain weighs, but I know a gallon of milk weighs 8 pounds. So if you think about, that's at least 50 pounds worth of stuff, probably more, because I'm guessing it's heavier than milk.
She just carried it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. She was strong and well, and she was motivated. She's trying to provide, right? And so, sure. And maybe they were set and she didn't have to glean every day, or maybe she could glean for a week and she could, thinking, okay, now I can provide for my family for a year by gleaning for a week. I mean, who knows? I don't know.
I do keep asking myself, what are all the reasons that this story made it into the Bible? All the reasons. Yeah.
I really think it has a lot to do with Ezra and Nehemiah. Because of this, the arguments that would have been going on about kicking out people who had married foreign wives, which is something that they were doing quite a bit when they were resettling after the Babylonian exile. So I think that may have been one of the big motivators to take that story and get it written down and then get it somewhere in the canon. Just because it provided, I mean, the way that rabbis and the way that the Jewish tradition approaches the scripture is it's not just cut and dry, these are the rules and follow them literally. It's a debate. You have to try to fight with it and understand it, and having multiple points of view was informative and valuable, right? So Ruth provided a really important counterpoint to what is basically institutional racism in Ezra and Nehemiah.
So maybe the original events got embellished over time into making it more of a cinematic. Like, just to kind of say, look what a great man did.
Maybe. Who knows?
Also,
There's,
I can hear you thinking over. The other option, though, where, when this was written, would be post-exile, just about. So then it might be, has nothing to do with racism, but has to do with lifting up the Davidic throne. Because
Right.
Ruth is the great grandmother, or the great great grandmother, one of those two, of David.
she's
So-
great, yeah.
And then you get Ruth, the polite person who asks permission, who, she's really lifted up in so many different ways. So, I don't know. Yeah,
This fun paragraph describing Boaz. Ancient listeners also would have appreciated the more subtle signals in the way Boaz is described. This is your knight in shining armor guy. The storyteller says he is an Ish Gabor Chayel. The word Gibor is often used of warriors, so it may hint that Boaz's strength is physical as well as financial. In short, he is just the kind of guy you'd want your daughter to bring home. It might not be too much of a stretch to imagine the storyteller imparting the information about Boaz with a nudge and a wink.
It's an oh no, he's hot situation.
which leads into our next question. What could have drawn Boaz to pay attention to Ruth? I mean,
Oh no, she's hot?
I mean, there are, I'm assuming more than just her gleaning in the field, right? And he's got all of his workers that he knows as well, but, yeah. He pays special attention to her immediately when he
Yeah.
sees her.
Who is that?
Maybe he sees, are there regular gleaners? So maybe she's just,
It's someone new that he doesn't recognize, yeah.
and does she look different? I don't know.
Yeah, maybe she's dressed funny.
But
In Moabite clothes.
Yeah,
doesn't this, maybe I don't connect the dots properly, but doesn't this circle back to the social obligation? He heard about her.
right. He may not have seen her before, though. That was my thought of like, oh, he heard Naomi's back with the daughter-in-law, but he's been busy out in this field and he hasn't actually seen her.
Yeah, but I heard at one point in the text that he had heard of the things that she had done. So he
Right,
had knowledge of her, probably of the circumstance, and maybe even of
her person.
Well, that he's got an obligation with respect to her.
Or a possible, yeah, because he ends up knowing something, but.
It's interesting when he's actually out in the field, when he's the kind of overseer, big guy, that he's not in his house gorging himself on.
Well, and he comes out to tell the workers, the Lord bless you. I mean, he's really not coming out to just survey his wealth and thief them and all this kind of thing.
So Raymond, you just said, he does what?
He comes out and he tells the reapers, the Lord be with you.
Which was simply the normal greeting of the day. So it wasn't
But-
unusual, I don't, at least that's the commentary thing.
Okay,
That was normal.
but still, he's not just like, hey, I'm so awesome. I have these fields and all these people
Yeah,
working.
no,
Yeah.
He's also he's clearly interacting with longer eating.
Mhm.
So, I mean, that's
Mhm.
something.
So. It might be a bad or a silly question, but who is Boaz? I mean, I know he's a wealthy landowner, but who is?
So he's a near
and he-
kinsman
Okay, but we
to
don't know.
Elimelech. And
He'd be a cousin or second cousin or
Cousin.
something.
Anything more about him?
we don't know anything more about him at this point. We will find out a little more of a description about him. But yeah, verse 20 in chapter 2 says, this man is a relative of ours, one of our nearest kin.
Oh, yeah, I just
Yeah.
didn't know. I was supposed to know more about him.
Mhm.
That's okay. Thank you.
So, not only does he observe her, but what is his reaction? What does he do? Both directly to her as well as directing his workers to do in regards to her.
Well, he directs them to leave behind more and even leave some of the harvested stuff for her, so he wants her to get a good glean out of it.
Mhm,
To whom does this young woman belong?
mhm, mhm.
He says, don't go out, don't go to other fields where you might have some trouble, stay close here.
Mhm.
They were my maids.
Yes, because why? Look in verse 9. Follow behind them. I have ordered the young men not to bother you.
Yeah.
So, and then he talks about the water and stuff. So he is protecting her. From being bothered by the young men.
So what is this? You see like these interactions that he's having with Ruth. Who does this paint a picture? Who is Boaz?
Well, he took a time to find out about her in number 11, verse 11. I have learned all you've done for your mother-in-law and your family, and I think that shows an interesting thing. May the Lord reward you for your deeds, and may you have a full reward from the Lord. So, I mean, he's taken the time to find this about this person when she asked him, "Why are you taking notice of me? And I'm a foreigner." So,
But he didn't do anything.
Uh-huh. Not yet. Yeah, that's our point. Like he could have, he
Yeah.
could have already done something about it.
Well, how
Yeah.
much time had gone by between when they arrived here and this fields? Like, was it just there?
That's a good question.
We don't know, but we do know that everybody knows what's going on.
Yeah.
So whether it was a week or a few days or a month or whatever, everybody, or he was at least in the know of who they were and what their situation was.
And I kind of doubt it was as much as a month because they came at the beginning of the barley
Yeah,
harvest.
yeah.
So my guess is it was within a week, but.
And the rumor went around very quickly.
Yes. I want to kind of take a little look at Ruth's response to him. So after she goes through, or he goes through and kind of does all these things about talking about protecting her and leaving, more for her than maybe other people would have left. How does she respond to that?
May I continue to find favor in your sight, my Lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant, even though I am not. She's kind of very humble, very humble.
Well, and in verse 10, she falls prostrate with her face to the ground as well.
So it says in our guide that we're doing, this would not have been a sign of groveling, but of profound respect.
Interesting how Ruth identifies herself a number of times as a foreigner,
Mhm,
and then she brings it up.
mhm,
Right.
mhm.
You've got an interesting question here. How does Ruth's response reveal her lack of knowledge about his responsibility to her?
So if she indeed,
As a relative.
right,
Okay.
then I mean, and granted, she was still a woman, she was still property, so there's still a power gradient
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
But that there may have been a conversation about, oh, I'm, your next of kin or whatever, yeah, or whatever. But she doesn't even like remotely go there.
Yeah. Okay.
And one of the things that our study brought up was just, again, kind of using that story as a way to play into Ruth's like true innocence as a person. Basically building her up to be, whether that's 100% true or whether a part of it's a little embellishment in story, but bringing her up to this level of just almost like the perfect human being, even though she was a foreigner, so that people would, read the story and overlook the foreigner because of the quality of her character.
And in chapter 2, she doesn't have the discussion with Naomi about who Boaz is until after
Exactly.
she comes
Mhm.
home. So she may truly have been innocent of who Boaz was.
Except maybe that he was a landowner.
Right, sure. Oh, yeah, yeah.
But other than that, forgive me, I've got to go through slides.
Oh.
Well, thank you for that. We won't. We'll forgive him. He said he would. I'm gonna let him.
So speaking of Naomi, then how does she respond? Ruth comes back loaded down with all this food, grain. How does she respond?
Oh, she's happy. She takes what she wants and needs first, and then gets the rest to Ruth.
Mhm. She took out and gave her what was left over after she herself had been
I
satisfied.
know, I thought that's.
Mhm.
Isn't that a common custom?
That's a good question.
Maybe as an elder, I don't know, but yeah, that is a really good question. Yeah, what stuck out to me is she ends up blessing Boaz by the Lord. So, she was really angry with God in the first chapter, and now all of a sudden she's seeing, the Lord whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. So, yeah. So she's getting some hope back.
Well, maybe the reason she ate first was she hasn't eaten all day. I mean, there's a practical piece to it. Ruth ate while she was out on the fields. So maybe, I don't know, maybe Naomi didn't eat that day.
Well, and maybe Ruth offered it to her first too. I mean, like said, hey, here's what I've got, take some, so I don't know. Yeah.
But it is just a really drastic turnaround, because just a chapter ago, Naomi was just like, the Lord despises me, everything is going to pot, I'm changing my name. And now in this chapter, she's seeing his provision and his redemption in her life.
I'm not so sure that Naomi was terribly surprised that this was Boaz, that Ruth was working with.
Yeah, maybe she came home with 6 gallons of grain.
It's a little bit more than.
Yeah, she's like, yeah, she might have been like, I bet I know
Yeah.
where. it is."
Yeah.
Boaz, it seems like she. This whole middle section here with 17, 18, 19, 20, but. It seems manipulative to me, like, what's really going on?
She's got the excitement of, aha.
Yeah.
There's a plan that we can work.
Very wow.
Yeah. Hmm.
So our overarching question that I like to ask each week, where do the characters see God at work, or where do you see God at work in the story?
Well, we kind of talked about at the beginning, the field she went to was definitely the right place at the right time, so.
And your question earlier was, is it happenstance or is it divine providence?
Mhm.
First, I don't believe there's ever happenstance within our lives even. But can God use happenstance? I mean,
Totally, yeah.
yeah. Yeah, there's obviously that one huge area where God is at work.
Well, and in the text that we're working out of, one of the things that they had discussed was even if God had laid out an option, they still had to, Ruth had to act in the way she did and present herself the way she did, and Boaz had to be take the moment to go. Again, we'll put about his responsibilities in the corner here, but about but he had to go above and beyond for her, above, you know, what he would have done for just another person in the community that wasn't well off, right? That was gleaning. So that opportunity, you know, for the actors to act as well within that context, because if they hadn't,
Yeah.
He was drawing too much out of it, that there's sort of a bigger picture, it seems like. I mean, Boaz sees this Moabite, sees this person that's different, he clearly sees herself as different, and, you know, it's a little bit tenuous about how she fits in and everything. But Boaz sees her, and I don't know, I just sort of reminded how God sees us in our situation. And the fact that she falls flat on the ground, you know, I mean, how many pictures are there in the Bible of before the throne of God? They're just falling down in kind of response to respect, goodness, whatever you want to call that. There seems to be kind of a parallel there. That may be a little bit strange.
I mean, I think the gist of the whole story had to be somewhat true per their tradition, because the oral tradition had passed this down to whenever it got written, right? If the authors were twisting things to make it look a certain way that was so out of context, people would not have accepted it when it got to the point where they actually wrote it. But when I've been reading it through this time, the way it's written and the way certain things are inserted and the way that things are described to try to get the writer's point across, and not just looking at like a historical account, but like that there was a persuasion component to it, I think is a really interesting perspective that I hadn't looked at before.
I was thinking that too, when I was at the start of chapter 2,
Mhm.
it starts out talking about Boaz, right? They could have just started with, so Ruth says, let me go out and do it, but it starts talking about Boaz.
Yeah, yeah.
Anything else that struck them, or that questions that are kind of lingering in your head?
Well, okay, so. Boaz doesn't give her any other big breaks, however, because on the very last verse, 23, she has to go back out in the field again to glean. So it's not like, oh, Boaz tells her, you're a relative. Here's what we're gonna do.
Mhm.
So that's pretty significant.
In chapter 3, though, that.
Yeah, it comes back and there's kind of a reason why, but yeah, again, why doesn't he do anything about it sooner? So, yeah.
Well, and we'll-
Does he know what to do? I mean, I'm sorry, it seems like a little bit of a complicated situation. How does one jump right in and say, this is how we're gonna handle it?
well, that's.
Or do they go, well, at least let her clean, for crying out loud, we'll figure this out. That's in my mind what's going on, but I could be wrong.
I mean, it could, but it also could be that he could have, once he figured out the situation, he could have gone to the person who's actually next of kin and said, hey, these people are in town. You haven't done anything about this yet. We need to manage
Yeah.
this,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And he didn't. So, you know, there's always that, because he didn't really have a responsibility to her initially, because he's not the first closest of kin, which we'll find out in the next chapter. But you know, it's kind of one of those, if you see someone doing something wrong and you don't confront them about it, are you part of the problem?
Listen,
I just went back here, Ruth in, verse 2. And Ruth said to Naomi, please let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after one in whose sight I may find favor. So that's kind of like looking, going to the field to find favor.
Well, or, you know, somebody will be kind to her. She's hoping somebody will be
just-
kind to her.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, I didn't know she wanted.
yeah. And leave grain, you know, and all that. So, yeah.
I'm really struck at how tenuous and perilous, I guess, the life of women,
Mhm.
you know, was.
Mhm.
You know, you think about in, you know, very patriarchal societies, that's, you know, in modern day, I mean, it's, you know, it's perilous as far as you know, assault and things like that, and even, you know, I think we tend maybe to look at the biblical time and think, oh, well, they were all, you know, pretty faithful and spiritual, they would never do anything bad, you know, it's like, yeah, very vulnerable.
Well, we could, once again, I have the closing prayer from the study we're pulling from, because again, they just say it better than I could, so, we can read that together to close. Mysterious God, your ways are higher than our ways, and deeper than our deepest imaginings. We cannot understand how you guide us, but we are so very thankful that you do. Help us to trust you with the future, so that we may be free to serve you and others with energy, intelligence, imagination, and love. In Jesus' name we pray. So we'll have off next week for Memorial Day, and then we're gonna take the next week off because Becca's gonna be out of town and I'm gonna be 4 days post-op. So after that, we'll meet the 11th of June to do the 3rd chapter of Ruth, and then the 18th to finish up with chapter 4. Thank you all for participating in the little interactive.
Yeah, that was really fun. That was super good. Thanks for filling it out. I was like, I was online and I'm like, there's nothing. And it was like all these like triangles and squares and circles and these diagrams. And I'm like, this is gonna be worse than not saying anything. Like,
Right.
I was like, if I print these out and people are like sitting there going, like, am I a triangle or a square? What?
I did.
there you go.